Bhabatosh Datta wrote that if a Nobel Prize is given, it will go to Amartya first.
Nice. And he was writing this in which year?
I think I would say 64, 65,
I see.
as early as that. And then I remember that I had asked Dr. Bhabatosh Datta, when you said he'll get the Nobel Prize earlier, he said, of course, Sukhamoy Chakravarty will also get them. Now, of course, in that context, I have to tell you that if Sukhamoy Chakravarty had not joined the Planning Commission, continued in academics, and not being too patriotic and Indian, and leaving the most coveted job in MIT, where Paul Samuelson and Robert Solow wanted him desperately, he would have got the Nobel.
Jayanta Babu, you have been very close to one of the most famous economists world has ever had, and certainly India, Professor Sukhamoy Chakravarty. And you agreed to share some stories of him, his life in economics, as much as you know. And there is, it's very unfortunate that there is very little that we can find in publicly accessible media. I'm pretty sure in specialty documents, there will be a lot available about him, especially on his works in economics. If we Google his name, we don't find much information, or at least as much as we should have found. So today, our effort is to pay a homage.
First of all, before I start, I must let you know that among my mentors, Sukhamoy is right at the top. All the teachers I've had, and not just in economics, in any subject. I went to pretty good schools and colleges. And that is because, one, his quality was that he's a brilliant person. He's a person who delved into knowledge, had the curiosity, and went deep into things. And on top of that, he has a second quality, that he was a remarkably good human being. So I can tell you this much, that what happened was that when he died on 22nd August 1990, I was at his bedside. And I think I cried pretty loudly. And I have only cried for two other persons in my life. My father my mother when they passed. That's the kind of person Sukhamoy Chakravarty was. And of course, in the course of the conversation, I'll give you various illustrations, the outstanding work he has done, various fields, various lectures, smaller articles also, which are excellent. And you're absolutely right. If you do Wikipedia or something, very little acknowledgement is given.
Yes, yes.
But to make a summary of that, I think logic of investment planning, development planning, is on the forefront, even today. Very few people can get into that kind of depth which he had developed over there.
Let's go to your personal interactions with Sukhamoy Babu. When did you meet him first time? In Presidency College, Kolkata, as a undergrad student, right?
I think I'll take the liberty of putting these episodes, several steps of Sukhamoy Chakravarty's life. Is what was Sukhamoy? What did Sukhamoy do before joining Presidency? And this is not based on my knowledge by interacting with him, but what I heard from reliable people, which I corroborated with him because I was very close to him. And then his days in Presidency, how he entered, how he rocked the whole class. I'll mention that. And then the next period is the Delhi School of Economics, where he joined Delhi School of Economics. I also went to Delhi School.
I see.
More or less the same time. And the next stage was when he joined Planning Commission. What he did in the Planning Commission is what you had asked me. And later on, the next stage was the chairman of the Council of Economic Advisors under Indira Gandhi and Rajiv Gandhi. And he was given free leash, complete freedom, and the last stage of his life. So this is the sort of sequence I'll follow.
Please, thank you.
Before I start what he did in Presidency, I'll tell you two stories. One very important incident about Sukhamoy. Sukhamoy was a very bright student. He and Amartya Sen were in the same class.
I have heard this. I have heard this information. Yeah.
They were in the same class. They were competing. And Mymensingh Datta once wrote about both of them, basically praising both of them as his two best students. And he said, in the depth of knowledge, nobody can touch Sukhamoy Chakravarty. He was better of them. But in terms of spreading that knowledge outside and interacting with the world, Amartya had a tremendous skill. Mymensingh Datta wrote that if a Nobel Prize is given, it will go to Amartya first.
Nice. And he was writing this in which year?
I think I would say 64, 65.
I see.
As early as that. And then I remember that I had asked Dr. Mymensingh Datta, when you said he'll get the Nobel Prize earlier, he said, of course, Sukhamoy Chakravarty will also get the Nobel. Now, of course, in that context, I have to tell you that if Sukhamoy Chakravarty had not joined the Planning Commission, he continued in academics, and not being too patriotic and Indian, and leaving the most coveted job in MIT, but Paul Samuelson, Robert Solow wanted him desperately, he would have got the Nobel.
I see.
But that is the difference. Now, let me also tell you the other thing that I heard, that this bright student, when he had just completed or about to complete his MA, he attended the lectures of Tinbergen, Jan Tinbergen, who got the first Nobel Prize in economics. And Tinbergen was the professor of Erasmus University in Holland. And Tinbergen gave the lecture at the Indian Statistical Institute. Sukhamoy Chakravarty asked him a few questions. And Tinbergen told Sukhamoy, just after the questions, he answered the questions. He said, I am not able to fully answer your questions, but I have a request. Can you see me just after this lecture? So Sukhamoy said, certainly, and he went and saw him. He said, you pack your bag. You are coming with me to Erasmus.
Oh, he picked him like that.
And there was no talk of scholarship. There was no talk of application. There was no talk of anything. Only thing he said is that although the Dutch people speak English, but Rotterdam and Erasmus, most people speak Dutch. But from the questions you asked, I could make out that for the daily way of life, the Dutch you need to know, you'll pick it up in a week or two. And then Sukhamoy went to Erasmus and worked under Tinbergen, who got the first Nobel Prize and is regarded as the father of economics. That is the kind of brilliance, I think, which is completely lacking in a lot of people.
I would like to add one story, Jayanta Babu, here, is that Tinbergen famously quoted that I learned from Sukhamoy more
Then he learned from me.
than he learned from me as a PhD advisor. That was the most fascinating. That's the most fascinating story.
Yes. And you would see, I think, in one of Sukhamoy Das books, a Tinbergen book, there's a photograph of Sukhamoy on the blackboard and Tinbergen looking. And there they said that Tinbergen with his best student. Okay, so that's another thing. The other aspect was that Tinbergen also wrote that if he would have loved to write his obituary to be written by Sukhamoy. And this was the same thing which Bhabata Datta wrote. Bhabata Datta wrote, when he wrote his obituary, I was trying to find, but I couldn't find it, but I read it myself. And in that he said that in my will I would have written that my obituary will be written by Sukhamoy Chakravarty, nobody else. And it's so misfortune for me that I am writing it. So this is sort of one of the pre-presidency days. And then Sukhamoy, of course, wrote a brilliant thesis on logic of investment planning. And then I think that attracted attention all over the world. And MIT invited him to come teach. And this was Paul Samuelson, who is another Nobel winner, of course. These are all Nobel winners. And Paul Samuelson is regarded as one of the top economists, and his Introductory Economics was a book our whole generation read as the first textbook. And Samuelson wanted him to stay But it was, those days what happened was people were so patriotic that most of them, Amartya Sen, who left Cambridge at the age of 26, became the head of the Department of Economics in Jadavpur and came back to India. All of them came back, including Jagdish Bhagat. So these are the people who could have done fabulously well. Of course, Jagdish Bhagavati and Amartya Sen are back in the United States, but they did come back just after peace. That's the way we had been brought up in our generation. So when he left MIT, he left and got a paltry salary and joined Presidency College. This was, I think, in 1962 or 61.
I see.
So that was the pre-presidency phase. And presidency phase, I must tell you, he came and started teaching mathematical economics, which none of us understood. A single person understood.
I see.
Because it was like more than Greek. Greek, I think one can understand one or two words. But his mathematics, I couldn't understand. Nobody could understand. And the class was, they couldn't leave the class because he was teaching, and that was a part of the syllabus. So I remember two incidents of that. এটা বাংলায় বলবো আমি। একটা হলো উনি আমাদের পুরো ব্ল্যাকবোর্ডটা ভরে দিলেন অনেক কিছু লিখে। তারপরে বললো তোমাদের মধ্যে কেউ বলতে পারো কি সলিউশন হবে এটা? তা আমি তো ঘুমোচ্ছিলাম। উনি তার আগের লেকচারে বলেছিলেন, কথা বলেছেন যেটা আমার ভালো লেগেছিল, কর্নার সলিউশন। কর্নার সলিউশনটা কি আমি জানতামই না, বুঝলামও না কিছু। কিন্তু আমি যখন দেখলাম, যখন জিজ্ঞেস করছে সবাই চুপচাপ, কেমন একটা লজ্জা লজ্জা লাগে। আমি বললাম, স্যার, কর্নার সলিউশন fabulous. Absolutely right. Spot on. মানে এটা হলো একটা পার্টিকুলার ইনসিডেন্ট। সেকেন্ড ইনসিডেন্ট হলো উনি আমাদের বোর্ড ঠোড়ে লিখে টেকে একটা প্রশ্ন করলেন, প্রত্যেককে একটার পর একটা স্টুডেন্টকে জিজ্ঞেস করছিলেন, বলো কি হবে। তারপরে আমরা কেউই আনসার করি। উনি বললেন, you don't know this? This is high school algebra. না স্যার, আমরা তো ভালো ভালো স্কুলে পড়েছি কলকাতায়। কোন হাই স্কুলে গেছি? সুখময় চক্রবর্তীর হাসিটা উনি এসে আমাকে প্র্যাকটিক্যালি জড়িয়ে ধরবার মতো। উনি বুঝলেন যে
কনফিডেন্স আছে।
হাই স্কুল ইন ইউনাইটেড স্টেটস, not or Holland, but not high school in Calcutta. এই দুটো ইনসিডেন্ট তো আমার, অফকোর্স, প্রেসিডেন্সি কলেজে সময়কার।
What else do you remember of him? Is there any other moment or inspired you?
Yes. Here I must say that what happened was Sukhamoy Chakravarty is also teaching for the first time an Indian audience. MIT was different because MIT, I think people were very proficient in maths. They took mathematical economic class, which means that you've got to do a lot of mathematics prerequisites. So you could follow Sukhamoy Chakravarty much better than we could follow, because we had no mathematics was taught, and we studied mathematics, but we were weak. So I think that's how it started, and all the examples I gave you. But then later on, he also realized that he has to switch his mode of teaching. And then he became much more coherent. And again, he taught us, which I still remember, the whole development planning. That's his forte. And we got to know development planning, and there was a paper in our BA Honours on Indian economics, which was related to development planning because of the 5-year plans. And that helped us tremendously, that he completely enriched that aspect of ours. Because we had very good teachers in presidency at that time. Bhabatosh Totta was there, Taposh Mojumdar was there, Nobendu Sen was there. All three very excellent teachers. Nobendu Sen taught us Indian economics. So that's what he did. But of course, the best part of Sukhamoy we got as a teacher was later on in Delhi School of Economics. Now, Delhi School of Economics, again, I'll start. And this, I think, because it's a joke, or not a joke, but it's a little humorous. সুকুমার যখন পড়াতে আরম্ভ করলেন ডেলি স্কুলে, তখন প্রচণ্ড নাম তার। MIT ছেড়ে চলে এসছেন, পল স্যামুয়েলসন শ্রদ্ধা করে, টিনবার্জেনের স্টুডেন্ট, রাগনার নার্স প্রশংসা করে, ওয়ার্ল্ড ফেমাস। ওর ক্লাসটা ছিল অপশনাল ম্যাথমেটিক্যাল ইকোনমিক্স। 80 থেকে 90 জন স্টুডেন্ট ক্লাসরুম ভরে দিল। তখন ওরা বলল সবাই নেবে ওটা, বাইরের ওটা ডেলি স্কুল ইকোনমিক্সও খালি ছিল না, কিছু কিছু বাইরের কলেজে ছিল। তারপরে যখন পড়াতে আরম্ভ করলে, within a week to 2 weeks, 4 জন স্টুডেন্ট মাত্র। প্রভাত পটনায়ক, মনমোহন আগরওয়াল, আমি আর ভরত রাম হাজারি, 4 জন আমরা টিকে গেছি পড়ল। আর সেই যে পড়িয়েছিলেন উনি, পুরো যে ইনভেস্টমেন্ট প্ল্যানিং খালি না, পুরো ম্যাথমেটিক্যাল ইকোনমিক্সের সব অ্যাসপেক্টস কভার করে। যার ফলে গিয়ে আমি যখন বার্কলিতে গেলাম, which is also very strong in mathematics. In fact, a lot of people got admission in Berkeley and left because they couldn't cope up with the mathematical rigor of Berkeley. I sailed. There was no problem in mathematical economics because of the background that we had from Sukhamoy. And in Berkeley, we had teachers like Roy Radner, Daniel McFadden, Gerard Debreu. McFadden and Debreu, Nobel Prize pages. Debreu is regarded as one of the top mathematical economists. Gerard Debreu, খুব ভালো।
So basically, Sukhamoy Babu came back to Kolkata to teach at Presidency College, and while you guys were studying at Presidency College, and he went to Delhi School when you went to Delhi School, so it was pretty much like you were following Sukhamoy Babu around.
Yes.
And then you came back to the Planning Commission with Sukhamoy Babu back to India after your PhD and professional career. So you were pretty much like, following him around. Yeah.
I came back to India second time. First time I went back because I was in the Planning Commission, and then Sukhamoy was not there, and I went back, and then I came back again with Sukhamoy, the last stage of his
Indira Gandhi, Rajiv Gandhi regime.
Now, one more incident of Sukhamoy Chakravarty as a man, I must say. Although this I could have said in Bengali, it's anecdote. but I'll say it in English because it was very important for me. It transformed my life. As you know, you guys are little better than us in the sense that you were not born before independence. So when people like us who were born before independence, to us heaven was England or any foreign country. And we used to see VIP and all that, Richard Burton's, see London airport and be enamored by that. So what happened was that I got admission in London School of Economics
Mm.
after my BA. And with a promise of Trinity College, Cambridge, taking me after one or two, whatever they call it, semesters or quarter. And I was all set to go, and I come from a middle class family. My father had retired, small pension, not much saving. We had no property to own property. And somehow, I think he said that go to London, go to study, and I'll somehow manage the money. And I knew my father couldn't manage it. So I was about to decide not to go, but at the same time, the lure of England was too much. So once I took a tram, and in the same tram was Sukhamoy Chakravarty.
Uh-huh.
And I told him this story. That I'm in a little bit of a dilemma. And he smiled, as if, he has the answer. He says, don't go to London School. You're not for London School. You come to Delhi School. And from Delhi School, we'll send you to one of the top universities in the world. And or if you want to go to London. So I said, well, I have to also perform. He said, I know you'll perform. And I promise you that. And that completely relieved my anxiety. That shook my chakra. Yeah, and I did very well in my BA. I stood first in economics honors. And so automatically I would have got some scholarship to Delhi. But I think he is being there help also. And the Delhi school I went, I don't think any university today can match that caliber people with so few professors. I mean, MIT and all, they have large number of professors.
Hmm.
Delhi school had, I'll give you the names very soon. Amartya Sen, my time, the day. Sukhamoy Chakravarty, Jagdish Bhagwati. It's such a pity Jagdish has not yet got the Nobel Prize. Jagdish is more than a Nobel Prize. Then we had A.L. Nagar in econometrics, K.N. Raj in monetary economics. That's the kind of stuff we had. Talking about people like Jagdish Bhagwati, because that's the generation. Jagdish was a professor in MIT. He was teaching in MIT without a PhD.
Hmm.
So Paul Simonson called him one day. I said, Jagdish, any two of your articles is PhD material. I don't want Mr. Jagdish Bhagwati, I want Dr. Jagdish Bhagwati. So can you do me a favor? can you pick 2 or 3 articles and say some theory of international trade or whatever like that, and submit it as a PhD? All other requirements are met. He did that. Ramalsal called the thing, and he got his PhD.
Wow, nice.
That's the kind of people we had. And Sukhamoy was sort of Delhi school, where, apart from the incident when the thing was limited to few, brilliant teacher. But now I have to tell you one thing, that when I talked to Sukhamoy, many times, well, I was the only guy who could tell Sukhamoy straight in his face if I didn't agree. Nobody had the guts. So I once told him that you are not a teacher for the top 3 or 4 people. You have to be a teacher for lots more people. And later on, he told me, I followed your advice. Now I am not as rigorous with other students, because you're absolutely right. They don't understand what I'm saying, a lot of them. And this, I think, I tested it out. There's a people later on who were his students in Delhi. Because there was a period when, after he left Planning Commission, he taught in Delhi school.
Okay.
He was much more understandable, down to earth. And in that, I have to give you one example, another example, because there's so many stories connected with it.
Yeah.
The other thing, anecdote I wanted to say, Yoginder Alag, who you know, heard of, he was India's power minister, and he is a very distinguished professor and economist, now Ahmedabad based. Yoginder Alag once, I think 3 of us were there and chatting. And Yoginder likes, I used to be like that before, I toned down quite a bit. I used to like to talk, and he likes to talk also. And talk sometimes without checking all the information, make remarks. So he was discussing with Sukhamoy, we were discussing some problem in economics. And he said, yes, I saw this thing explained, Tyclos article, 61 November. Sukhamoy looked at Alag and said it was not 61, it was 63.
Okay.
With Sukhamoy, you couldn't sort of, it was like dates had to be right, everything had to be right. Once I asked him, and this was at his last phase, I asked him, sir, you're so good in mathematics. Sometimes I think you're not an economist, but a mathematician. And he said, কি বলছো জয়ন্ত? আমি তো 1951 এর পরে ম্যাথমেটিক্স কিছু জানি। Mathematics কত ডেভেলপ করে গেছে 51। That's the kind of person.
And I also heard that he had a huge depth of knowledge in physics and literature and philosophy, other than, of course, economics, mathematics, and those kind of stuff.
Those days, the brilliant people like Sukhamoy and Amartya Sen, they knew all subjects. Like Satyen Bose. Satyen Bose, I heard the story that he had a friend who was having problems in history exam for MA or BA. And he said, just spend 3 days with me and I'll teach. This is Satyen Bose, the famous
scientist, physicist.
That's the kind of knowledge those people had. It was remarkable. That generation. I think we can't really match it. Yeah, talking about his mathematics thoughts. And English, as you pointed out very correctly, I'll give you actual insight. Sukhamoy once came to Berkeley to give a lecture. Everybody in Berkeley, as I said, they're not just numerate, but supernumerate. Mathematics is like the second line. So I knew that Sukhamoy would be speaking mathematics. I said, Sukhamoy, I have one request. Your lecture is for how long? He said, 1.5 hours. I said, sir, no equation in the book and no mathematical term. You will give a lecture, plain English. I have to tell you, sir, that English definitely matched the superlative English which Amartya is known for. It was brilliant. And he didn't use a single equation and no mathematical terms. The Berkeley audience was surprised, but they liked it very much because he conveyed all the deep thoughts in plain English. So then I realized, who am I talking about? Really brilliant.
Nice, nice. Great men like this have such surprising qualities. Yeah, and then they develop and they connect dots in a weird way, I guess.
So Sukhamoy, of course, as I said, that he would have definitely got the Nobel Prize if he had not joined the planning. When he joined the planning commission, I have worked in the government also, in policy. Initially, you struggle quite a lot because you don't know who is taking the decision, what is the lay of the land, and how do you interpret data, what is RBI data really good for, what are the other data, how good is our Indian GDP numbers, everything you will have to figure out. It takes time. And if it takes time for less intelligent people like me, for Sukhamoy Chakravarty, it would take more time because he likes to think that any number, anything is given, is accurate. And if he doesn't see any accuracy, then he sort of loses. So he had to struggle quite a bit. And then there were a few other incidents and all that initially because T.P. Dhar was the deputy chairman of the planning commission when he joined. He also had invited Bhagat-Singh Minas, very famous economist, to join. And Minas somehow didn't get along with members, including Shu.
Okay.
Ultimately, of course, Minas left. So those are the things that took a little bit of time.
To understand the whole dynamics of this place.
And the other thing was that I think that was a period, if you look at the period when he joined, people were already feeling that socialism is not the panacea for all the problems we are facing. That market economy was emerging. But people like Sukhamoy, with the background of, he was never a card holder, but he had a background of left background, like most of us. And so it took him a little bit more time to get into the sort of proper groove. But of course, he overcome all that, and but this is because of that. He, in my opinion, he missed a lot, and I think some people have also commented on that. That's why you got the Nobel. But then he did the reason he joined Planning Commission was not because of power. There's a lot of power. Not because of money, because there's not that much money. But he joined because he wanted to help. He wanted India to grow. He wanted India to accumulate capital the most efficient way to promote growth. Of course, he was believer in domestic growth. He said that he was not like people like me now, feeling that the economy should be completely open to the world. So he believed in closed economy more than me. But that was the kind of fashion those days. And it was Nehru set it up, the whole socialistic pattern of society, commanding heights of the economy. All the other things which of course people now criticize. But they had their role. And without that, I think we would have had problems. But that is another factor which sort of didn't help him too much initially. So Planning Commission was very well regarded by Indira Gandhi, trusted him. And in that thing, I have to give you incident, what happened. When he was just before he left Planning Commission, because Indira Gandhi had declared emergency.
He had a little bit of conflict with Indira Gandhi or so. I have heard they didn't go get along together very well toward the end. Is that true?
No.
No.
He was a great believer. He was like a true loyal person in the sense that he believed in the Prime Minister, trusted the Prime Minister. And I'll give you two examples of that. I think one will come later, but Indira Gandhi, I think, he was very keen on that short-term forecasting model by me. And then he was in Rotterdam at that time, Erasmus, teaching. He took, like a sabbatical. And I met him, and we had a nice time. And I still remember that he looked at me, smiled at me, and he said, "No, আমি তো মদ ফদ খাই না, তোমরা তো নিশ্চয়ই খাও, তুমি মৌরিকে নিয়ে," Mori was Charusita Chakraborty's daughter, who got the Bhatnagar Award in chemistry and died very early. That Mori নিয়ে তুমি যাও, কিনে এনো আমার জন্য ওয়াইন, কারণ একজন বিজনেসম্যান আমার বাড়িতে আসছে। বললাম, আপনি বিজনেসম্যানকে খাওয়াচ্ছেন? তো বলছেন, হ্যাঁ, এখানেই থাকে, তো দেখা করতে চাচ্ছিল বারবার। আমি বললাম যে আইসো, তোকে যদি ডাকিয়ে একটা বিজনেসম্যানকে আমি তো জল খাওয়াতে পারি না, তুমি একটু কিছু কিনবে না। So then I went and got it. আর সুকুমারের সঙ্গে অনেক জোক ক্র্যাক করা হলো, সব কিছু হলো। তারপরে উনি প্লেন ধরেছিলেন কয়েকদিন পরে, এই প্লেনে হার্ট অ্যাটাক। প্লেনে হার্ট অ্যাটাক হওয়াতে দ্যাট ওয়াজ দ্য টাইম হি এমার্জেন্সিও যখন হয়ে গেছে ছেড়ে দিত। দিল্লি স্কুল অফ
ইকোনমিক্স।
ওনার দুটোই ছিল, যে প্ল্যানিং কমিশন না হলে দিল্লি স্কুল স্টুডেন্টদের পড়াবে, Uncle Professor of Mathematical Economics title. But before I talk about that, I think as a chairman of economic policy, content, subject content. He is the first person who wrote a fabulous piece on monetary policy in India. He wrote a fabulous piece on the balance of payments problems. He wrote a fabulous piece on energy policy. আর ওই পিসগুলো তুমি যদি পড়ো ওগুলো তুমি পাবে তুমি আর্কাইভস আছে প্ল্যানিং কমিশনে কিংবা কাউন্সিল অফ ইকোনমিক অ্যাডভাইজার কোনো হবে বিবেক দেবরয় whom you have heard of, who is in the chairman of the Council of Economic Advisors now under Narendra Modi. He has, I think, those papers. আমি জোগাড় করি ওগুলোতে বোঝা যাবে যে ওনার যে থিঙ্কিং was completely novel thinking. It was not a summary of what others have written and then tweaking that. It was his own personal thing. So he made huge amount of contribution as chairman. And there I have to tell you that this is very important, very, I think, important in my life. Sukhamoy, when he was about to die, and his death, of course, again, I can keep on talking because his death happened not accidentally. It happened because he was being treated at All India Institute of Medical Science, where he had a very good doctor, surgeon, heart surgeon. And then All India Institute of Medical Science had a strike. The workers, there was nobody working. So at that stage, Sukhamoy had this heart attack. And he had to be rushed to Ram Manohar Lohia Hospital. And when he was rushed there, the heart specialist there couldn't get the papers from the doctor in All India Institute of Medical Science. So he was being treated without diagnosis. And I went and visited him in hospital every day. Few days he was there. I've never seen such dirt and filth in any hospital, even in India. And that is the condition he was in towards the last stage of it. And then I remember that one evening, and the next morning he died, I was having a chat with him. And he told me, Jayanta, I'm a little worried. I said, why, sir? I said, why? He said, just see this letter. I saw the letter, it was from Rajiv Gandhi. And Rajiv Gandhi wrote that we might land up with balance of payments problem, although I have been promoting export growth. I want you to write a good paper on export growth, how to step up growth. And he said, I have to give it to him soon. I smiled at him. I said, sir, you trust me. He said, of course. I said, go to sleep. 2 days' time, you'll get a paper. Just put your signature and sign. And Sukhamoy's smile, that unique smile of his, like a child, as innocent as a child. He looked at me, fantastic. This is the last conversation I had with Sukhamoy. The other things, small things I can tell you that Sukhamoy was so dear to not only me, but to my wife and kids. Now they are no longer kids, but those days they were kids. That my daughter and my son and my wife used to go to the house. We went regularly with no ulterior motive. I didn't want a job or anything like that. And the book he gave my daughter when she was about, I think, 7, 8 years old, was Jungle Boy. And if you entered his house ever, he had a living room, what we call living room here. And that living room was just filled with books. And he was a prolific reader. He was not a bullshitter. Sorry for using the term. He read things and then it was very sad. And I think, again, if there was no strike in All India Institute of Medical Sciences. It's not that he had a very severe heart problem. The kind of heart problem he has, a lot of people. So this is my sort of take on Sukhamoy Chakrabarty. বাংলা এই কথাটা বলি যে ওনার ব্যাকগ্রাউন্ড তুমি যদি দেখো, এই ব্যাকগ্রাউন্ডে তুমি যেটা বললে, সব সাবজেক্ট জানতেন ভালো, সব বিষয়ে কথা বলতে পারতেন, ভালো পরিবার থেকে এসেছিলেন, বাবা বোধহয় যাচ্ছিল, আর মেয়েকে সুন্দরভাবে মানুষ করেছে, কমপ্লিট ফ্রিডম দিয়েছে। মেয়ে ইকোনমিক্স পড়েনি, মেয়ে মাকে ফলো করে, ললিতা দিকে ফলো করে কেমিস্ট্রি পড়েছে। আর কেমিস্ট্রি তুমি যদি চারুশীতার ব্যাকগ্রাউন্ডটা দেখো, কেমিস্ট্রি যে পিএইচডি করেছিল, যখন সুকুমায়দা কেমব্রিজে ছিল কয়েক মাসের জন্য, তখন ক্লাস করেছিল, তারপরে কিছু ক্লাস করেছিল, করে পিএইচডি, খুব অল্প সময় পিএইচডি করেছিল। আর এত ভালো গবেষণা করেছিল, ভেরি ইয়াং এজ গট দি ভাটনাগর প্রাইজ, বাট উনিও মারা গেল।
Two things I will mention from our conversation now and conversation that we have been having for a while. So Sukhamoy Babu was in planning commission for Indira Gandhi.
Rajiv Gandhi was in the Council of Chairman of the Council of Economic Advisory. He was under both. Otherwise, for Planning Commission, he was only under
Indira Gandhi.
Mhm.
So non-economics background, we kind of understood the changing economic scene in India while Rajiv Gandhi was in power. He promoted much more industry, or the outlook was changing. And that was one set of changes. And then further, there was another change when during PV Narasimha Rao's regime, when you were a part of that, where India went through the economic liberalization, which was a complete 180-degree change on Indian economic policy started with. What is the difference in the vision that people like Sukhamoy Babu had at the beginning to open market?
Sukhamoy, in some sense, was ahead of his time, because it was not that he was against globalization, but he knew the bad sides, bad effects of globalization. The whole spread of consumerism.
I mean, among famous people, we know Tagore. Rabindranath Tagore was writing a lot about it, and it was the talk of the town during that era of how the difference in outlook in America versus Europe versus China versus Russia. toward economic policies and how they treated the citizens. But I know what Tagore used to think, and they kind of leaned toward, they were like little left leaning toward uh, uh, social democratic socialism. So
What Sukhamoy focused on was an efficient growth path with sort of complete emphasis on agriculture and industry, but ignored trade a little bit. Part of the reason is the globalization angle, which I talked about. So that was thing, and whether he would have, I think my feeling is that he would have changed. Suppose he had survived, he would have changed.